Okay, let's get into the details. First, we're going to add a new object. I'm going to hit Shift A. I'm going to add a cube. Now, this in by itself is pretty boring, but if you wanted to manipulate the cube, let's say you wanted to stretch out this corner, or you want to round off the edges, or do something else other than just stare at a cube. To do that, you go into Edit Mode. To enter Edit Mode, you hit the Tab key. That gives you a different view of your object. Now we're looking at the anatomy of the object. Let's cover those. The first thing we're going to cover is vertices. A vertice is any point that surfaces meet. For example, here. I will zoom in on a vertice. This vertice is where this side, and this side come together at a point. Now, I can manipulate these vertices in any way. You can move them by hitting the G key, and I can move them by moving the mouse. Now, if you want fine-grained control, let's say you want to move this vertice exactly along the x-axis, well, I can restrict the vertice to the x-axis by hitting the X key. And you see by the red line that I can now only move that vertice along that red line. That's the x-axis. I can do the same for the y-axis, and it shows me a green line. And I can only move this vertice along the y line, same with z. If I want to move the vertice up and down, I restrict it to the z-axis. Now, to go ahead and plant it in place, left-click the mouse. Now, you notice I have this three-dimensional cursor here. It's called the 3D Manipulator. If I wanted to move this vertice along any of these axes, I can click and drag on that axis, and it will move the vertice respectively along those directions. If you do not like to see this, if it gets in your way, come down here and you can simply unselect it and it will disappear. Now, that covers vertices. The next part of the anatomy of an object is the edge. The edge is where two surfaces meet. Obviously, this is the edge of this box on this side, and this is the edge of the box on that side. Right now, I'm in vertice mode, which means I can only select and manipulate vertices. Well, let's say I want to manipulate the edge. So down here, you have three buttons. One's the vertice select, one's the edge select, and the other's a face select. We'll get to faces in a second. Let's select edge select. Now you can see that we can no longer see the vertices, but if you click on the edge, it actually selects each edge. And then we can manipulate that edge the exact same way as you manipulate vertices. So I showed you can move them around by hitting the G key, but what if I wanted to make this one smaller? To make it smaller or larger, you hit the S key, that's the scaling key. Once you hit the S key, you can drag the mouse and make your edge smaller or larger, depending on what you need to do. Let's make ours a little bit small. Very boring object indeed. The last component to a 3D object is called a face. And the face are your flat surfaces of your object. Let's go down here and select the face select. Now you can see we have little dots on each face indicating that we can now select that face. And we can use the same keys, G for moving, S for scaling. A new key I'm going to show you is called rotate. If you wanted to rotate this face, you simply hit R for rotate. And now you can rotate it along its center. Well, that's fine, but what if you wanted to rotate this face in relationship to the center of the object? Well, to do that, we'll come down to the pivot center, and we have a few options. We can select the 3D cursor, which is this item right here. So if we hit R and rotate, it now rotates, you can see, with the 3D cursor as its center. Same with the median point. That's the default. That rotates around the center of what you have selected. Now that we're on the subject of faces, let's talk about normals. What is a normal? Well, a normal is basically which direction a surface is facing. Well, let me explain what that means. So let's go back into object mode. I'm going to hit X and delete. I'm going to hit Shift A, and I'm going to select a cylinder. Whenever you place new objects, by default, places them right on top of your 3D cursor. For example, if you wanted to end up right back in the center, you can either click as close to the center as possible, or if you hit Shift S, it brings up a snap menu and you can bring your cursor to the center. Now let's delete the cylinder. I've prepared a file to demonstrate the importance of normals. I'm going to go to File, Open, Tutorial. Now, this is a very simple object, and what I have is I have the normals turned on so you can view which direction each surface is facing. If we look at this in object mode, in solid view, it looks like an ordinary object, right? If you tried to print this, it might print properly. But there's a problem, because this face here is actually facing inward. That's because the normal is actually inverted. If I go into wireframe mode, you can see that the blue line indicating which direction the face is facing, it's facing in, and the rest of them are facing out. Now, might not sound like a big deal, but when it comes time to print, the printing software might actually confuse this surface as being the outside of an object on this side or inside the object. So you might end up with an artifact of this area here, which you intended to be an open space, to actually get filled in because it thinks that this side of this face is on the inside of the object. To remedy this, you can simply select the face that is facing the wrong way, and you go to Mesh, Normals, Flip Normals, and that will flip the select face. Now it's facing in the proper direction. The other way to do it is select your entire model by hitting A. You go to Mesh, Normals, Recalculate Outside. That takes every surface and tries to recalculate the normals so that each surface faces out. If I were to recalculate inside, now you can see that all the surfaces are facing inward, which is undesirable. So we're going to go Mesh, Normals, Recalculate Outside. Now the next part is we need to worry about the faces and the edges and how they match up. I'm going to deselect everything. I'm going to now turn off the normals. So now that we've corrected that normal on that face, you might want to go ahead and print now. But this model actually has another problem. This face, you'll notice, goes from the top of the object all the way down through the intersection and to the bottom. The problem with this is that if I go into edge mode, and if I select this edge actually is not touching anything, meaning it's not connected in any way to the rest of the object. The edge of this face and the edge of this face, if I go back to face mode, the edge of this face and the edge of this face should be connected, but they're actually not, right? So this is called a non-manifold face. Non-manifold means that the edge of a face is hanging off, touching nothing. And the problem is when you get into the 3D printing, you're actually printing physical objects, and you cannot have an object where the edge is touching nothing. So what happens is the 3D printing software will actually throw an error saying that you have non-manifold edges. Now, I'm going to go into vertice mode. I'm going to deselect by hitting A. How do we find our non-manifold edges? If I hadn't have told you that that face and that edge were not connected, you wouldn't necessarily know by looking at it that they weren't connected. However, Blender will give you an option to view them. If I go to Select, Non-Manifold, it will now highlight the faces and vertices that are violating non-manifold. So then I can go and I can quickly repair them. Now, it's quite easy on this model because it's a very, very simple model, but when you get into complex shapes, say like a statue of a cat, right? You might have a simple non-manifold interface somewhere in your model, and to find it, you'd have to go and search through each and every edge by just hitting Select, Non-Manifold. It will then select for you the vertices that are offending. So now we can go fix that. So the problem with this face, if we go into face mode, is that it's a single face going from the top of the object through itself and right to the bottom. So the easy way to fix this is I'm going to select that face, I'm going to delete it by hitting X and selecting face, and I'm going to go into Vertex Select, first selecting the first one, hitting Shift and selecting each other one, Now to create a face in this open space, I hit F for face, which is a very nice shortcut. But what happens if you have an object that you need to repair many faces, or you need to enclose an open gap or an open face? Let's delete this object and start with a cylinder. I'm going to hit Shift A. I'm going to add a cylinder. It doesn't matter where in the screen it is. This is just for illustration purposes. I'm going to go to Edit Mode. I'm going to select my faces, and I'm going to select maybe a few like that, and I'm going to delete them. If I get out of wireframe mode and look, now I have a big gaping hole in my mesh, and you will know that this edge, that edge, all around there is a non-manifold. So I need to create a face. Now, if I were to go into vertex mode, select all of these, and to select multiple at the same time, you hit the C key. The C key will bring you up a little cursor, which you can then just simply click and drag the mouse, and anything that's inside that cursor gets selected. I'm going to hit Escape to get out of that. Now, another way to do it is notice that all of these vertices along here are pretty much connected in a string. So Blender has a feature called Loop Select or Edge Select. If you hit Alt, Shift, and click the right mouse button, you can then select all of the vertices that are connected in a row, like this open face. If I just hit F, it will just create a flat face, and you'll actually get more problems than you want. As a matter of fact, this was a cylinder, and now you have a flat surface. We do not want that. I'm going to undo that by hitting Ctrl Z. Blender has a nice feature called Autoface or Autofill, and by hitting Alt F, it will then try to reconstruct the faces as you intended. Now you might get some extra edges in there, and that's fine. That's just Blender's algorithm for filling in that face. Even though it doesn't match the rest of them, when you look at the physical object, there's no difference, so you don't have to worry about that. Let's go back into edit mode. I'm going to deselect these. Before I showed you how to extrude vertices. Let's extrude the top of this face. I'm going to select the face, I'm going to hit E to extrude, and I'm just going to drag it up here. Let's say I hit E again, and I just click the mouse button. Problem is I've extruded another face, but it's sitting right on top of the face before it. I'm going to go into vertice mode to illustrate that when I select a vertice, you will notice that when I select it, it highlights a bit of the edge on either side of what is connected to that vertice. But you'll notice that this edge is not selected. What that means is that this edge and that vertice, even though they look like they're touching, they're not connected, and you'll end up with non-manifold edges. Luckily, these are right on top of each other. Now, what that means is that you have two vertices that are in the same place. I'm going to hit the number pad 5 to go into orthographic mode, so I can zoom in really closely. And even if we zoom in very closely, you still can't tell that there are actually two vertices here, even though there are. If I go and select a little bit around it, I can't actually grab that other one. Let's go into edge mode. Let's grab that edge. We'll go back into vertice mode. Now you can see it. Now you see that vertice isn't connected to these. So if they're right on top of each other, what you want to do is you want to merge the two together. If I go into wireframe mode and I hit C, which is my select tool, like I said, anything that's underneath this cursor gets selected. So now we've selected both of those vertices. And you see up at the top here, how many vertices do I have selected? I actually have 3 selected. It's interesting. Oh, here we go. Here's a third one that I didn't realize I had selected. So I'm going to unselect that. So now if we go back here, you'll see that it looks like we have 1 selected, but up here, this little 2/128 means that I have 2 out of 128 vertices selected, and that's not good. So to merge these two, I'm going to pull up a context window by hitting the W key, and it gives me some options. The option that I want is called Remove Doubles. Actually, I could do Merge or Remove Doubles. Because they're on top of each other, I can simply hit Remove Doubles, and it knows that the ones that are so close to each other, it's just going to merge them together. And you'll see up here, it said it removed 1 vertice. So now, if I select this, you'll see all 3 edges are now connected, and these are not. to avoid having to go each and every one of these, I'm going to simply hit A twice to select everything, bring up my context window and remove doubles, and you see that it had removed 31 vertices. 31 vertices were so close to 31 other ones that it merged the two together. Now you see that I showed you that other option of merging. Let's say you have this vertice, and I'm going to hit Shift, right click, select that vertice. Let's say you wanted to merge them together. Simply selecting the two of them, you hit the W key, and I'm now going to hit Merge. And it's going to give me a couple options. It's going to say merge at first, last, center, or at the cursor. What this means is that if you remember, I've selected this vertice and then secondly selected this one. This means that this vertice right here is the first one that I've selected, and this one is the second or the last. If I had selected 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, this one would be the last here. And you can see that it's the last. If we zoom in, it's actually a little bit lighter color than the others. It's actually a white color. That indicates to you the last vertice that you had chosen. So if I select this one and then this one, I'll hit the W key and I'm going to click Merge at last. And what that does is that had taken that vertice and put it in the exact same spot as that one and merged them together as one vertice. So that covers the basic building blocks of modeling.